Should we worry less about vehicle emissions? It's a fact that they're only responsible for 20% of total air pollution. Can an alternative fuel in vehicles bend the pollution curve in one of the most polluted cities of the world? How does the pollution levels look like in this massive worldwide experiment amid the crisis of COVID-19? This and more on the NGV World podcast. Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to the NGV World podcast. I'm your host Ricardo Carmona. Thank you very much for all your comments and staying in tune for the weekly episodes. I'm really excited this week because we have a very interesting interview with one of the most impactful personalities around fighting air pollution in India, one of the most polluted countries in the world. And I would like to invite you to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast app. You can download Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, or even Spotify, which is very popular these days, and find the NGV World podcast and subscribe. So we are going to be covering how vehicles really affect the environment. How impactful are they on the pollution levels, on our health, and ultimately on our lives? Now, without further ado, let's go to the main part of the show. Hello everyone, I'm really happy for the interviewee we have today. She is the Executive Director at the Center for Science and Environment of New Delhi in India, and she has a lot of experience with air pollution and with fighting the pollution curve and trying to bend it down, trying to reduce it. I'm very, very glad that we have today with us Mrs. Anumita Roy Chowdhury.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Anumita. I'm really excited about this talk that we're going to have today, and I would like to start asking you an important question because we are very used to understand that pollution from vehicles are really only a part of the problem, and then we tend to underestimate all other industrial factors or domestic factors that also play a role. What is the real impact on pollution coming from vehicles?
So that's a very important question for us right now because, and this is something that we also call the politics of science. It's fascinating because in cities of India now, the new source apportionment studies that are being carried out, they show relative contribution of different pollution
Mhm.
sources to air pollution. And in that, you find that the contribution of vehicles varies between 20% to 30%, sometimes 40%, sometimes even 15%. And as a result of that,
Mhm.
whenever you are trying to push for very strong action on vehicles, there is always this pushback, a lobby pressure, either from the industry
Mhm.
or for the car owners. They're saying that why do you want to take such strong action on us if we are just 15% of the
Mhm.
problem, or 20% of the problem, right? Without realizing that when your overall pollution levels are so high, then to bring that down to the level of air quality standards, you need deep cuts in each source of pollution. Now, more than that,
Mhm.
another very important signs that people really need to keep in mind is that vehicles require special attention for another reason. Among all other sources of pollution, vehicles are one of those who are very close to our nose level, the proximity. our exposure to vehicular
Mm.
pollution is very high because when we are traveling on the road, driving, or when we live close to the roadside. In fact, a fascinating study has been carried out in India by Health Effect Institute, where they're showing that
Yeah.
maximum impact of vehicular pollution is up to 500 meter from roadside. And when they applied that criteria to Delhi, they found that of almost close to 55% of Delhi's 17 million people live within 500 meter from some roadside. So therefore what it shows and tells you that it is not enough to look at vehicles' contribution to the overall pollution and say it's 15 and 20%. It is even more important to
Hmm.
look at your exposure levels to the toxic emissions from vehicles. And because the vehicular pollution and the emissions are extremely toxic, and as you know, particularly diesel emissions, which has been classified by
Hmm.
WHO as a class 1 carcinogen for its strong link with lung cancer. And that's the reason why we are so worried about diesel emissions. So not only that, the whole vehicular pollution is extremely toxic. So that's the reason why we need to understand the link between not the overall quantum, but also the overall toxicity and the toxic effect of the pollution. And that's much more harmful. That's the reason why I'm saying that vehicular pollution requires special attention and more stringent action.
Yeah, it's a very important topic because I think in this case, as in many cases, when we use as human, when we use data, we have a lot left out because we need to use average, because we need to have one single number. And when we have to average what the impact of vehicles have on pollution, we just say the number, it's 20%. But it's quite different if you live along a side road that it's clocked every single day. It's very different if you go through your
Absolutely.
to your job every day and going through to dozens or dozens of cars. And it's really about you. And I'm very tied to the idea of and so it's a quote that I heard a lot of time ago. And the quote was that the first thing that could give you a longer lifetime, the first let's say the most important thing to increase your lifetime, it's picking the place where you live. That it's more
Exactly.
important than any other factor, because the air that you're breathing, it's what will make you live a longer life or a shorter life. And it's an invisible impact that we really don't understand in our everyday basis. And it's really a thing to worry. And can we Anumita, start seeing like the light at the end of the tunnel? Can can really any alternative fuel in our vehicles actually start uh, bending the pollution curve? It can actually start reducing the pollution in really highly polluted
Exactly.
cities. I mean, it's that 20% of air pollution that we've talking about. Can it be reduced for something that it's really impactful?
It is possible. And this has really been it has been our experience. And this is a very important learning curve that we have in Delhi. For instance, when we
Hmm.
had started our campaign about 20 years ago, and I'm talking about the
Hmm.
90s now. So at that point of time, our emission standards for vehicles was very, very poor. We were really literally at Euro zero level. And
Hmm.
we follow European emission standards. So we had not even adopted the Euro 1 standards. And the whole question that
Mm.
came up at that point of time, that how quickly can we improve the vehicle technology and fuel quality so that we can reduce emissions? Now, at that point of time, when the proposal came that can we align with the European standards that was prevalent in Europe at that point of time, which was Euro 2, then the authorities said no, it is not possible because the matching fuel for Euro 2 vehicles are not available, and that will not be available until 2005. So the whole question came up, but the pollution levels are growing in Delhi. We cannot wait for another 5 years to get Euro 2. So what do we do in the interim? And that
Mhm.
was the compelling reason why Delhi and then the Supreme Court of India, based on the recommendation that went from the government and its committee, decided and gave the direction that all the most polluting segments of vehicles on road, which are diesel buses, diesel taxis, diesel auto rickshaws, and
Mhm.
all auto rickshaws, they must move to natural gas. And this order, this momentous order that came in 1998, gave about 3 years.
Mhm.
It said by 2021, the all buses in Delhi, all auto rickshaw, the three wheelers, and all taxis in Delhi will have to move to natural gas. And so when we made that transition, it was one of the most hotly contested, but at the end of the
Mm.
day, it prevailed. And finally, by 2002, Delhi made 100% transition, and it converted all its buses, taxis, and three wheelers to
Mhm.
natural gas. Now, this leapfrog, and we call it a leapfrog strategy in Delhi at that point of time, because the emission levels that we achieved with natural gas
Mhm.
at that point, it was equal to Euro 4. So which meant that when we could not so with when we could not move our diesel and the gasoline segment to improve but the
Mhm.
natural gas vehicle segment gave us a much better improvement. And as a result of that, and the studies are available in Delhi today, which show that because of this move, how pollution levels was arrested, stabilized, and even reduced during that period of time. And so that was the first leapfrog strategy of Delhi. And natural gas, the alternative fuel strategy, was absolutely necessary at that point of time when our diesel technology, when our gasoline technology was languishing. So now,
Mm.
because of the transition, Delhi has continued to stay on that track. So even today, all our buses, all auto rickshaws, all taxis, and in addition, the small commercial, the freight, the small commercial vehicles
Mhm.
are also running on natural gas in Delhi. And that is the fuel that powers the transport sector in Delhi. So now this has given us big advantage. And now 20 years later, now this year, when India moved to Euro 6 emission standards, which
Mhm.
kind of aligns with Europe now, right? So with that Euro 6, now the natural gas technology and the vehicles that are now going to come on road will be even cleaner, and we are really going to
Mm.
kind. And so that has given up. So this is the next level of transition that we are looking at.
Mhm.
And it's fascinating to see today that not only that we have CNG, the natural gas in Delhi, but now they have also started hydrogen CNG, where they are blending
Mhm.
18% hydrogen with CNG to run the buses. The pilot has started. So therefore, what I'll say that in a developing country like India, where it has taken time for us to improve our mainstream technology of diesel and gasoline, the alternative fuel has kind of shortened the fuse. It has helped us to sidestep the mainstream technology, and it has given us much better emission results and therefore the health benefit as well.
Oh. Yeah, that is a really important leapfrog for many of us watching the natural gas scenery developing, and knowing that it's possible to run a city, for example, in all its transportation on natural gas, and how it is affecting. It's really important for us to see us on that mirror and try to understand what it's the real impact. And and I was thinking, Anumita, that maybe you can share it with us, maybe
Hmm.
some anecdote on, because you lived all this time in New Delhi, for example. You've seen closely and really throughout your career the development of New Delhi before and after the implementation, and that you mentioned around 2001 of going through to 100% CNG. What anecdote you have that could make us see the real impact, the day-to-day impact of air pollution on a city using full natural gas on a highly polluted city like New Delhi? What anecdote do you remember before and after
You
this
know,
change?
this has been a fascinating experience for us because we were in the forefront of that campaign. And therefore, and you can
Hmm.
imagine that when we had 3 years to make that transition, during those 3 years, there was so much pushback, so much lobby pressure, and we had to fight the battle in and out. Lot of
Yeah,
misinformation campaigns were happening against CNG at that moment.
yeah,
And the misinformation
yeah.
campaign that said that CNG is more harmful than diesel, that kind of, because there was a huge diesel
Yeah.
industry, diesel lobby. They wanted to protect the diesel market. And clearly, there was a lot of these things that were happening. So, which actually meant for us that we had to stay ahead of the curve. We had to access science and information very quickly to
Hmm.
counter those that kind of pressure. And this, and particularly this battle was being fought in the Supreme Court of
Hmm.
India, so which also meant that we had to be ready with our science and data. And there used to be, and I still remember, there used to be riots on the road because every time the Supreme Court would give a deadline for the diesel buses to
Hmm.
go off the road, and you will see that there would be strike, there would be, so it was quite a conflicted and a contested process. But at the same time, there was a lot of good support for this whole initiative.
Hmm.
Even the media support was fascinating. The way they reported this matter, they brought the science and transparency into the whole debate, and which helped us to counter most of this
Hmm.
disinformation that was happening around that time. And so that was, and I still remember, so this was kind of, there were even lawsuit against us, that why we, for fighting against diesel at that point. So, and then after, but the fascinating part was that despite all this, the opposition, the conflict, and the counterclaims, that at the end of it all, the Supreme Court refused to dilute the order, and it kind of upheld and said, no, this will have to get implemented on CNG. And it said, no, Delhi will have to implement the CNG program. And once that happened, after that, the whole process was hugely disciplined. And then the city focused on implementing the program. And finally, December
Hmm.
to, I still remember that first December 2002, the last diesel bus went off the road, and the entire CNG program was established. And what was fascinating, and I still remember, that after the full establishment and in full implementation of the CNG program, when we started to see its impact on air quality, I mean, it was so nice to see how the public perception of the change, when people will say that now we can see stars in the sky, that's a kind of statement. So it was not about the complex chemistry or the data of air pollution, but the simple public recognition of the fact that the sky is clearer and we can see the stars. So that was a very important recognition. And that was also a turnaround point for Delhi, because after the successful implementation of this, and when there was the very strong public recognition that a good thing has
Yeah.
happened in the city, we also saw political support building up for this strategy. So those were really something to really remember. And I do remember that very fondly.
Oh, that's impressive story, and an interesting moment, having the last diesel bus going out of the transit area of Delhi, and that those changes taking place, it's really a mind changer, because we as humans, we tend to first reject any idea, any uh, all sort of dangerous thoughts go through our mind when something new comes up, and this readily available fuel that it's here right now, uh, it can really change the way we look health, and the way we look pollution. It's very very touching for me to hear this story. And and Anumita, I want to change the subject right now, or start talking about the subject that is on our minds every day at this point, and it's about the novel coronavirus, or the COVID-19.
Yeah.
And recent studies that actually tied to 2 points that are really logic, and have much to do with what we're talking about right now. And it's um, how how does this pollution levels right now that we have in many places, actually it's kind of uh, having a real impact, because we're staying at home, right? So we're seeing all these videos of how even the animals are starting to realize that there are not so much or so many vehicles on the
Yeah.
roads, and there are not so much people around many different places. And I'm really wondering about what data it's telling us right now on this, that I can figure out that this is kind of the biggest experiment put in place by humanity, and in keeping our roads without the most amount of cars that without with the least amount of car that we can have on the roads right now. What science is telling us right now? Have there been any interesting data showing us what is the real impact of keeping all those cars in our houses, or parked out? How does particulate matter looks like without this activity?
Yes, Ricardo, it is. It's so amazing to see that how quickly the nature heals itself the moment humans have
Hmm.
withdrawn, you know. And today, if you come to Delhi, because of this public health emergency, everything is shut today. All factories are shut. There is no construction happening, and nearly all vehicles are off the road. And because of that, we have seen dramatic change in air quality. It's unbelievable, and we have never seen it, at least in the whatever memory that we have now of Delhi's air, so clean. And you look at there's a blue sky, you see birds, you see stars. It's like, I mean, suddenly you've been transported into a world which like looks so unreal. Now, when we are looking at the data is certainly showing very, very sharp decline in pollution levels, and before and the post lockdown period, and the and when and especially if you want to relate this change to the impact of taking the vehicles off the road, we have done a very interesting analysis. We have looked at the hourly change in air pollution during the day, during a lockdown day, and a day which is previous to lockdown. Now, in a normal, regular
Mm-hmm.
day, you will normally see two big humps of pollution during morning
Mm-hmm.
hours and the evening peak hours. But now, during the
Mm-hmm.
lockdown, what is fascinating is you are seeing a flatter curve. You don't see the morning
Mm-hmm.
pollution curve and you don't see the evening pollution curve, you know, and that is an
Mm-hmm.
amazing evidence, okay, to show that the impact of vehicular pollution. And our Central Pollution Control Board, they have also computed the relative contribution of different sources to this decline of pollution. And they have found that the vehicles' contribution is really the one of the most substantive contribution to this decline because the vehicles are off the road. So now the question is that this change has happened because of public health emergency. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly none of you, and this public health emergency, which has also come to us at a huge cost of economic and human
Yeah.
distress, right? Now, obviously, we do not want an emergency of this kind to give us clean air. But what we certainly want to learn from this unintended experiment, I mean, that's the way I would like to call it, that what can we learn from this and how can we invent solutions for the
Mm-hmm.
future? Now, already, because of the emergency and the lockdown, we are inventing. For instance, the one of the biggest invention or the the inventive solution for us right now is that how we have all made enormous lifestyle changes, and this whole work from home, this virtual workplace
Mm-hmm.
that we have now been able to make a reality. And as a result of that, we have now maximized the digital platform. And this digital platform is to be able to have the virtual link. Okay. And
Yeah.
now, if we had done this, and this technology was available to us even earlier, now moving forward, to what extent we can learn from this and we can institutionalize some of these
Mm-hmm.
changes and take that forward. But the bigger issue is that that after the lockdown, economy is going to bounce back naturally. It has.
Yeah.
And now for that, when we are going to get into that economic reconstruction process, governments are going to give the stimulus packages to the industries. We have to ensure that while that economic reconstruction happens, we do not lower the environmental safeguards. And both need to happen together. And there is a compelling reason for that today. At least people have understood it this time, and what science is also telling us that if we live in polluted areas, otherwise
Mm-hmm.
also, and we are exposed to polluted areas for a long time, then our lungs and heart are already compromised. And therefore, when a
Mm.
pandemic hits you, your lungs are too weak to fight the virus. So, for the future, therefore, we have to learn this lesson and understand that cost of not taking environmental action and reducing the pollution risk will be much more expensive, like we are seeing right now, the way the
Yeah.
economic cost of this is playing out at this moment. So, if we have understood this, the future solution will have to be built on clean technology, clean fuels.
Yeah. This experiment has really been teaching us what the real human capabilities are of working offline, of staying at home. But as you mentioned, and this has to start to go back to the previous point. Try to reach that previous point to the economy to start recovering, and it's a really interesting point of view. What can we learn to this about this situation, and what you mentioned on the last part about our lungs and how people are really already has compromised its organs, and how can how what can we expect And in a recent Harvard study, they were linking using data to link the amount of death or the death rates of different cities, trying to link that with the pollution levels around that city. And the findings were that you have 15%, uh, around 15% increase in that death rates that are affecting by coronavirus uh, in those most polluted cities. I mean, you get a higher chance, close to 20% higher chance to go to the farthest level of risk in those polluted cities. So, Anumita, what can if those findings are real and let's say consistent,
Yes.
what can we expect to happen in India? I mean, you have in India the top most polluted cities on Earth, and you have one of several of the highly populated cities of the world. What would you expect? I mean, what are the difficult things that you are expecting at this point, tying together COVID and pollution?
So, after the lockdown and after the post pandemic period, I mean, that of course is a big question mark. And what we would expect, I mean, is that India, at least this decade, had begun with lot of promises. And this was really the time when India was gearing up for to implement the National Clean Air Program, which has kind of mandated different polluted cities in the country to reduce their air pollution levels by at least 20 to 30% by 2024. And all these cities, polluted cities in India, are already in the process of making their clean air action plans
Mm-hmm.
and are also implementing it. Now, at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, we know even at the central level, a lot of the roadmap. So after the implementation of the Euro 6 emission standards, we are
Mm-hmm.
looking at real world emissions issues. Now, the whole focus as it was emerging right now, we were kind of getting into that process and we were about to gather that momentum, the speed for change. Now with
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic, now that's a question mark that when we come out of it, are we going to stay on course? Are we going to deviate? Are we going to weaken and the safeguard?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so but the big lesson is that India cannot go back to the normal. We have to now talk in terms of a new normal.
Yeah.
And the new normal will have to ensure that the mobility transition, the industrial transition, both happen and adopt a clean pathways right from the beginning. We cannot lock in more pollution. Now, it is possible, therefore,
Yeah.
that we can have a reform based economic reconstruction process. So, if suppose today the stimulus package is going to be given to the automobile industry for it to revive again, but
Mm-hmm.
several other things can be worked around it for which can help us to ensure that we can keep even while we are growing, developing, we can reduce our emissions. So we have to be a lot more inventive, creative in the way we will be designing our policies in the future, and that's where the focus has to be now.
Okay. And it's an important focus for those cities to not let the reduction stop. Uh, I'm really eager to know what's gonna happen over the next years. I'm following India really closely, and I would like to for you to maybe suggest us uh, what we can do around many countries that we that all the audience of this podcast is at this moment. What can we do amid this crisis to really underscore the importance of enforcing the air pollution regulation to protect human health. I mean, because we actually are having this crisis, and it's actually hitting our lungs directly, our lungs, and we are in the best position to really suggest the change, to really maintain change. What would you should suggest to our audience around the world
The
to really start a new wave around 2020 and really increase the awareness of pollution in many of our cities? What would you suggest?
very glad, but the message is very clear to everyone, I think, now, because this is one crisis and we are all in it together. And what we have understood from, and if you look at it from the perspective of air pollution and public health, that, and the studies that we have, and as you have already explained, that if we understand that where and how air pollution uh, compromises us, and the health risk that gets enhanced, and this health risk is also going to increase across the world with aging
Hmm.
population, the impact of children. Now, this pandemic has given us the opportunity to make the health risk visible. We have understood health risk. Even earlier, when in India we said that 1.2 million people die annually because of air pollution related diseases, it I mean, that itself is a reason
Hmm.
for a public health emergency. But today, because of the pandemic, when I'm saying 20,000 people have got infection in India, or 11,000 in Mexico, I mean, these
Hmm.
numbers are something that people are now beginning to relate to. To earlier, these were only statistics to them. People did not understand the human story behind the statistics. But I think pandemic is giving
Yeah.
us the opportunity to understand the human story behind the statistics. Now, if we understand that, then going forward, even though it's
Hmm.
a crisis, but the rebuilding that is going to happen post pandemic, I think we should also look at it as an opportunity, to opportunity to build it differently, not do the same thing again, not make the and repeat the same mistakes again. And if we are conscious, if our policy responses are adequate and is built on science and responds to the and integrates health criteria in the policy making more consciously now globally, then I'm sure we will be able to, that will be a much more powerful change that we will be able to see. Therefore, I'll say that entire world is now going to get into economic reconstruction process. But this time we cannot lower our guards. This time we
Yeah.
cannot afford either another pandemic or even enhance our public health risk. And so, if we can make these numbers clear, that how much of economic gains of a country gets undermined because of health risk, these things will have to be understood and responded to
Hmm.
with a much greater urgency. And that, I think, is very important for everyone to understand.
It's an interesting approach. How can we that you were mentioning, that how can we bootstrap on the knowledge or the interest that people is having around data, and use that to the advantage of taking even larger steps around reducing pollution on many of our cities. It's very important because the awareness is there at this point, and even showing the most basic number that before this crisis there were already this many millions of people being affected. And I remember very much a really impactful scene that I saw from a doctor in India, actually, Dr. Arvind Kumar, that I will be having in this podcast very soon. And he was mentioning the real impact on his patients around time, and he was basically saying that lungs are pink when you see them open, wide open. But he, in many years, for so many years, at this point in time, he has a long time without seeing. He spent a long time without seeing those pink lungs in India because of pollution, because babies are starting to live his life, uh, starting breathing that polluted, highly polluted air, and women are getting more lung cancer frequency than ever, and things are really bad because of pollution. And that's the point that where we can use your support, Anumita, and your uh, studies and data to try to enforce this action and taking place. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I wanted to hear from you. Maybe if you have any favorite story on your career that you remember that might be a turning point. Maybe a simple story or a simple quote from a friend, or something that you would like to share with the audience that could cost an impact on the way you see things.
This journey of more than 20 years to battle air pollution, the memories that you have of this, and these are most deeply linked with what you remember uh, as the
Hmm.
deeper part, the way the human story has unfolded around air pollution and health crisis. And what I really remember are these those who get in touch, from a child to an ailing person. I mean, I still is etched in your memory when a child calls you up and says that my father, my brother, they are asthmatic, they have respiratory conditions, and it hurts me to see my father to go out and come back home gasping for breath because there is no clean air. you know I mean, a child calling you up to say this. There are many people who call me up and ask that, can you tell me where can I go and live? Is there a cleaner place where so that I don't keep falling
Yeah.
sick because of air pollution? In fact, the most poignant story that I remember of this cancer patient who, after coming out of his treatment, he calls me up and he makes the effort to even collect air pollution data of a place which is away from Delhi and cleaner than Delhi. And he wanted me to go
Hmm.
through that data to tell him whether it was safer for him to go and live in that place. you know so I think what is really etched in my memory is the string of human stories that are, where people have kind. So this is one part of the story, but then
Yeah.
the other part of the memory is that it's just not the despondency around the issue, but it is also the hope that you build around the issue. There have been so many moments
Yeah.
in the years when you have won small battles all along the way. There have been court fights. There have been you're pushing for an idea. You're pushing for a strategy. There is a pushback, and then you win
Hmm.
that battle. There have been We have lost too. There have been battles we have lost, but there are battles that we have won, and
Yeah.
that builds the hope for the future. And I think, and that's where the focus now needs to be for us. Even though the things are bad, but a lot of things are changing. And even though we keep saying that air pollution is a problem, yes, it is a problem. But in the developing country like India, and I'm still optimist, I'm hugely hopeful because
Mhm.
I'm still saying in India, we are taking steps which will help us to avoid a lot of the pitfalls. And if we can stay on track, if we can continue to build public support, public awareness, change the political conversation around this, which is also happening in India right now. So I will keep focusing on that silver line to build that hope for the future.
Yeah, it's really touching to hear those stories because we often even in the company I work for, we often tie together fuel or cleaner fuel with with the word environment or the word ecological with which we use a lot in our country, but we never tie together cleaner fuel
Mm.
with life itself,
Yes.
because that is the point. I mean, it's not the cleaner burning fuel or this is the most environmentally friendly. It's pretty much not about the environment itself. It's about human life and in people trying to get things matters on their own hands, as you were mentioning with those patients, because when it touches your livelihood, it it has a different scope in our minds and has a different meaning. It's really important that I haven't thought about it like that, but it's actually life what we're talking about when we say environmentally friendly, or even when we talk about Euro 6. It's lives that we're touching in every point, in every step that we humbly can take and to move forward. And Anumita, just to start wrapping up this really interesting interview, uh, what are you looking at this moment that it has been that you're considering interesting around any topic? I mean, what do you think that we as people that it's interested about air pollution, air quality, what do you think that most of us should be looking at? Should we be looking at any recent development, any science study or data that might be coming out in over the next months or the next years? What would you suggest us to stay up to date with?
Um, so, I mean, there are a lot of studies are happening now. It's amazing the way science is evolving around air pollution, health risk, and also the solutions. And so, I mean, it is difficult to pinpoint any specific study, but we will certainly keep tracking different genre of studies. One, of course, that we will certainly do is to look at the whole health science related to air pollution. And there is an interesting genre of studies coming up looking at the linkages between health science, air pollution, and the whole link between health, air pollution, and climate change. So that's one genre of air pollution where we'll certainly be looking at. And the other is where that is helping us to understand the solutions better. Because to take on the challenge of air pollution now, we are looking at a massive transition at a scale where we're looking at a clean fuel and technology transition, mobility
Hmm.
transition, and we really have to understand and
Hmm.
keep looking at that. Now, so I'm not kind of recommending any specific study as such, but would say
Hmm.
that we have to keep tracking the science very well now because all low-hanging fruits are over. Issues are getting more
Hmm.
complex now. Solutions are getting complex now, and we will have to build public understanding of the solutions. And the focus now has to be on the solution. So, if the new studies, new science is kind of bringing greater clarity into the way forward, then we need to track that and, more important, disseminate that so that the people begin to understand that new science.
Yeah, that message is really important. That more specific changes and more specific studies and data needs to be captured, because it's kind of a second stage in that sense. Thank you very much, Anumita. Any final word to our listeners? Any final advice related to air pollution and air quality, Anumita?
I think the only thing that I would like to say is that we need to build big public and political support for solutions now. And we have to hope. We have to remain optimistic, stay focused, and work on solutions, build support for solutions. In the future, solutions are also going to get much more complex and difficult and harder because
Hmm.
all soft options are over. And therefore, this is really the time to build, and the pandemic has taught us that how collectively and as a community, if we understand the crisis and the urgency of the situation, then we do
Hmm.
rise to that occasion to support difficult decisions and difficult action. Now, if we have done this, if we have understood this, going forward, we have to continue and stay on that track and keep and stay focused on solution and on the big hope for the clean air.
Thanks a lot, Anumita. What a wonderful advice, and to stay on track and understand with a really optimistic point of view what is the real potential of humankind itself. Thank you very much, Anumita. It was a pleasure to have you. Just one more thing. Where can people find you? Where can people get in touch with you? Over the social media or any other way that you have and that people can reach you.
So people can certainly write to me at anumita at cscindia.org, and the website of Center for Science and Environment, where you can see me, and you can also keep writing what I write, keep reading what I write on our and fortnightly and the down to earth fortnightly that we put out, and this is available online. So I am available, and I'll be
Hmm.
happy to engage on any issue that comes my way. And I will encourage people to get in touch with me.
Thank you very much, Anamita. It was a really pleasure to finally have you on this podcast, and I'm really grateful for your participation. It's a real honor to bring this knowledge to our audience and try to spread it amid this crisis. And of course, I want to wish you the best, and I mean, to stay safe, and we're gonna be hopefully we're gonna be able to overcome this crisis, and of course, in the meantime, trying to work for a really less polluted system, less polluted air, and just to increase our livelihood, and and just to get a better life. Thank you very much, Anumita. Take care.
Thank you, Ricardo. Wonderful talking to you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
So there you have it, a really wonderful experience talking to Anumita. If you got this far on the episode, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and don't miss out on any weekly episode. So see you next week.